Okay, so among you all, if I say the word pea pie, what do you think of? Is it this? Or is it this? Okay, well. you guys, seriously. Okay, so for folks who are thinking about this and anything else, which I don't really want to inquire about, I'm going to give you the Cliff's Notes version about what PPI stands for. This is the Panama Pacific International Exposition, and this happened in San Francisco in 1915. Yeah. So World's Fair is like, yeah, it is. Come on, guys. Maps, 1, 2, there we go. So World's fairs are basically a county fair, but on a global scale, and this one brought exhibits from around the world, about 31 individual countries and at least 40 states in the Union, and hundreds of artists, performers, inventors, farmers, and businesses, all together in the marina. Yeah. Hey. You are in San Francisco. We may not like them, but they're still part of us. All right, getting back to it. So, of course, one of the things that you could see at the Panama Pacific Exposition was a scale model of the Panama Canal that was like a couple of acres. It had a wall around it with a moving set of seats so they could, like people mover you. And to give you an idea of how big this was, those are two dudes who are like cleaning the grounds. Tiny guys. So that obviously, the Panama Pacific one, right? The next thing you could see was a delegation, diplomatic delegation from Samoa who were here doing cultural demonstrations in the Midway for some reason. Giant typewriter. And this is like the postcard version, but it was a real thing. That wasn't just an illustration. A fully operational demonstration-sized Levi garment factory where they were making little kids' coveralls. The latest in life-saving technology for premature babies. And shout out to Jennifer Batt, who talked about this in New York in 2019. A man on a biplane doing loops and other things later. Shout out to Barry, who talked about this in 2017. And new types of fruits, vegetables, foods, and that's to say nothing of the sculptures and the paintings, thank you. Art, poetry, performances, special events, and, like the architecture of the fair itself, some of which might be familiar, because some of it's still here. Okay, so the Tower of Jewels. For most visitors of the fair, this thing is the first thing you would see from the cable car as it crested the hill. And now I have to back up for a minute because I have a fun one. There's one thing that we love at Salon, and it's a hilarious rivalry, like a good beef, right? So 1915 was actually the second World Fair that San Francisco had, and it was because of a rivalry with Chicago. Okay, all right. Enough of that, y'all. Come on. Okay, so, Chicago had a great fire in 1871. Didn't seem like it was that great to me. It burned about 3 square miles of the city, and for the most part, they'd rebuilt after 5 years, but there were visible remnants of the fire for like 20 years afterwards, right? And so they threw this thing, the Chicago World's Fair, you might have heard of it, the White City. And this was partly a celebration of recovery in 1893. That is 22 years after the fire. And it ended a little early because it was freezing cold, Chicago, right? So, M.H. DeYoung, who is that DeYoung, yes. Yeah. So he attended the Chicago World's Fair and was like, oh, San Francisco could do this so much better. And he raised $40,000 in 2 weeks, and that is in $1893, right? And so in January 1894, 4 months after the White City closed, San Francisco opened the California Midwinter International Exposition of 1894, or as I like to think of it, the screw you Chicago, I just need a light sweater fair. Layers, yes. So, of course, yes, correct. In 1906, as we all know, we have the San Francisco earthquake and the big fire, and San Francisco recovery goes really, really fast. And before I move on, I have to point out that I am not making up this beef. They are comparing sizes. So, San Francisco's recovery goes so much faster that only 4 years later, in 1910, they're already starting to plan for a World's Fair. And this is going to be, like my head is bloodied but unbowed, right? This is, we have survived it and we've come back better. So take that, Chicago. Okay, so back to this thing finally. So imagine you're riding a cable car up over Fillmore Hill and this thing appears rising from a 20-foot tall wall of vertically planted ice plant. I got a lot of hissing in this one. Sorry, guys. So as you look at it against the glittering water of the Golden Gate, this marvel of a modern skyscraper covered in paintings and sculpture, rising layer upon layer like a huge wedding cake, it seems to shimmer before you. It is 435 feet tall, and in 1915, this would have been the tallest building west of Philadelphia, except 2 months prior to the fair opening, the Smith Tower in Seattle opened. Oh, my God, you guys. They're ornery tonight. All right. It's the weather. It is the weather. It is the weather. Okay, so while this was a marvel of modern skyscraper design, the fair building also served as a display spot for murals and sculptures, and the fact that they'd had to cut it down 100 feet and nix the viewing platforms for budget reasons meant that proportionally it's kind of off, right? And some people applauded the architects and the builders for making such a showstopper. Others were like, oh, it's frivolous, it's gaudy, it's unsophisticated, maybe a little extra, right? It encourages a liking for messy art. Yeah, let's hear it for messy art. Others hit back that if you can't be frivolous at a World's Fair, where can you be? But they weren't wrong about it being extra, because it didn't just seem to glitter, it did glitter, and that was because it was covered in 125,000 2-inch wide crystals. And because I'm a theater major with unlimited craft supplies, I sort of like made one. This is actually a little big, but props! Yay! All right, I'll take that. So these crystals were called Nova Gems. They were a high-index flint glass in a brass hanger with a mirror behind it, sort of like that, suspended from the building on a hook and wired so that they would ripple and move in the breeze. And they sold them all afterwards as souvenirs, and they made jewelry-sized ones. These are incredibly collectible. And I have to talk about a research pet peeve of mine, because I was looking for where were these on the building. Maybe I can get a picture. They don't photograph because of the technology of the time. Shimmering, moving, long exposure is just not doing it. So I was reading all these books. They all disagreed. But I did find a poster that they were selling that has glitter. Because the next closest thing I could find to an explanation of where they were is like this tiny piece of a corner of a picture. The Nova Gems were the brainchild of a man named Walter Darcy Ryan. He was the fair's lighting director, and he was from the Westinghouse Corporation. He talked his way into the role, and the story goes that he was so full of ideas that his contact with the fair decided to shut him up by giving him half an hour in front of the fair board. 4 hours later, a stunned fair board exits, having fully funded all of Ryan's proposals. And this was a little surprising at the time because in 1915 there was still a really deep suspicion about electric lighting. Even though gas could light your house on fire, you know, it was scary, electrocution. In 1891, President Harrison had the White House wired for electricity, but famously refused to touch any of the switches. And like, honestly, I wouldn't touch the thing either. So, you know, fair. And also in 1903, Thomas Edison is here electrocuting animals because of his beef with Tesla, you know, yeah. But on top of the fear, this method of lighting for buildings at this point was called outline lighting. And it looked like this. This is the Ferry Building in 1915, and this is the official photograph, and you can tell why in a minute. Because outline lighting is really, really pretty, and it's used to great effect when it's in overwhelming masses like here at Coney Island. But it required a lot of work to put up and maintain, and if any single bulb failed, you could break the line and ruin the whole effect. And that's to say nothing of the problems with night vision. You can see that this is actually someone's family snapshot where you can see all the like gaps in there. None of that in Walter Ryan's plant. He hid the lights everywhere, behind bushes and in sculptures, in custom-built thematic pennant boxes. This is all of the stuff that Disneyland and other theme parks do today, all to give light without blinding the viewers. So instead of strings of lights flickering on at full darkness, as the sun set each day over the fair, powerful new high-wattage tungsten filament arc lights at the bases of buildings slowly came on. Yeah, science. Science and art. The art of science? All right. Yeah. So instead of the fair disappearing into the darkness, the buildings now stood solid and in full color, giving a sense of permanence and splendor. And oh yeah, did I mention that the Peapie buildings were all in color? Right? Take that, White City. Walter Ryan actually worked with the fair's director of art to pick the pigments that would look good under tungsten arc light so that the fair would look the same at night as in the day. So he had basically just invented floodlighting. And if you imagine this as the Disneyland castle, you can see that this was such an amazing, you know, revelation. But now he took his powerful searchlights and he's shown them on the tower. So then it's nighttime and these things are blowing in the wind and you basically have the world's first disco ball. Imagine that in 1915. Just so, and if that wasn't enough, he had other surprises for the crowds. In the Court of the Universe, two fountains with marble columns in the center became light bars. They actually had so many bulbs in them that they had a fan in the bottom that had to kick on while they were on so they didn't melt themselves. Yeah. In the Court of Abundance, they had some flame effects in some sculpted snakes and an 18-foot glass sphere in the fountain that actually used interior lights to make it look like it was a globe rotating. He also produced something called an electric kaleidoscope, which threw multicolor moving patterns of galaxies into the glass of the Palace of Horticulture. And I really wish there was more information about this, but there's not, because the thing that Darcy is most famous for is something called the scintillator. This is literally a row of 43 3-foot-high searchlights with colored filters manned by a detachment of Marines who can take orders and which used San Francisco's own fog as a backdrop to create displays of colored light. Yeah. So as a backup, he also had a 224-ton steam locomotive installed on blocks, and on nights when there was no fog, they would fire that thing up. And you can see in this postcard, it would blow steam out the smokestack and then into some special flagpoles that had steam vents in them so that they would have a nice field to play with. And of course, he painted the steam locomotive to match the building so you wouldn't see it's a train, right? Did it sparkle? I don't know. It was painted. So later versions of this effect use fountains. They use fountains of water, they use smoke, firework effects, or ambient dust for basically the same effect, right? So in the end, the exposition's International Jury of Awards created a new class of illumination as decorative art. Yeah. And awarded Ryan the Grand Award for Illumination. What had previously been scary to use and painful to look at was now more beautiful than blinding, more awe-inspiring than alarming. And in the end, San Francisco really does have a very long history of being really into rainbow lights. Yeah. So here is to messy art, delighting in beauty and technology, and never being afraid to be a little extra. Cheers.